Hello and welcome to the webinar. Most of you are online now, so I guess we'll get stuck right into it. So I guess firstly, before I get into anything, what I really want to do is nail down who this would really benefit. So to know if this is for you, you might be a sole trader or a person looking at getting into business, or you might be a small business owner already, and you need to scale and grow to get to the next level. So what I want to think about is a little analogy of a boat, a little rowboat, and that's you. Now, whether you're in it by yourself or you're in it with a team, you've got a boat leader and they steer the direction. That rowboat is going to go across an expanse of water to a beautiful tropical island, and that's where you want to be. So this boat has to get through the break or the surf. Now there's some significant challenges early on, particularly if you have staff, or if you're thinking of hiring staff, or even if you're on your own and you need to get past a few initial hurdles, like first customers, managing a few customer issues, trying to scale, and you're probably going to get a few big hits early on. Now, this guy here at the front, or at the back, whichever way you look at it, is controlling and directing the boat, and he points it directly at the waves on just the right angle. Now, let's call that your focus. So we've gotten through one wave here, it's a little one, but as you can see, there's another one, quite a large one coming up on the horizon. That may peter out a little bit by the time it gets here. But also in the distance, you can see clear, flat water, which is pretty well smooth sailing. So what we can liken from that is that in the early stages, it's a little bit like business. And, sometimes this can happen. So if this guy at the front is doing his job and he's steering it in place and the team is working cohesively, and, the other people in the boat could be the systems that the guy uses, or the team and the systems that they use. But long story short, a cohesive team working together and a cohesive team of systems or people will make it through, provided that everyone's motivated, that everyone is doing what they should be doing, and you should be able to make it through to the other side. Of course, there will be of occasion that big tsunami or unpredictable giant wave that you just can't help but being swept up by. But if you're out in the ocean, out here in the distance, you probably have a better chance of surviving that anyway. So the best bet is to get beyond the break as fast as possible to avoid this. So what we're going to cover today, this is me if you wanted to know what I look like. That suit's since got a little bit dirty, but what we're going to cover today is defining the problem, some examples of systemization, what to look for when using software, and what to look for in outsourcing if you're going to go down that route. Now, outsourcing doesn't have to mean India, China. It can be someone down the road. But we look at, what can you do in your business to, break down some of the tasks and problems and figure out how you're going to solve them. So, what's the problem? Who are we here to help? If you are working 12-hour days and you can't seem to take any days off, if you're driving all the way into work to get the information that you need, and that might be a half-hour round trip or a 1 hour round trip, or sometimes 3 or 4 hours. I've known people who have had businesses that it's 2 hours to get to their place of work. And, you might be handing over some physical data, and there's risks to that. Mind you, everything is a continuum or a trade-off. So whether you get to keep it, but then house might burn down, something might happen to the files that might get broken, and then they're unusable. On the other hand, if they're in the cloud, they cost money, they might be able to get hacked, but which one do you choose? It's a bit of a decision point for yourself, but I would lean more towards having things in the cloud, purely from your own time perspective. Printing reams of paper to get anything done, you shouldn't have to do that in this day and age. Unable to guarantee start and finish times of employees, and that goes for when they're on working on a desktop as well. So whether they're on Facebook, Instagram, on their phone, doing something under the desk, you need to measure the productivity of what they're doing. Using a shop diary communication book, sometimes people read them, sometimes they don't. It's really hard to make sure that someone's actually understood something, and certainly hard to hold them to account if you've passed it on in a communication book and they're not really been able to make sure that you can follow through on them if they haven't done what you've written down in there. So it might be, don't use the office printer until Wednesday when it gets fixed. They come in, try and do something, stuff it further, and you can't go, oh, well, I told you, because as far as they're concerned, you didn't. And even if they did read it and forgot or didn't care, you still can't hold them to account. Overuse of email and lengthy and often emotionally charged replies. Sometimes people, have you done this? Yes. Why are you asking me? You should know to check here or there, or you can put systems in place that give little notifications when things are done. It's a good way to track where everything's at, and it's a good way to make sure that we don't rely on email for every little snippet of conversation. So, remembering that there's only 24 hours in a day, there are certain things that you can do to readjust your day. So typically a drained business owner is in this top category up here. They're not sleeping as much as they should. They don't have as much personal time as they would like. They've got quite a lot of admin because they're usually chasing their tail on staff, on reporting, on getting things done and ready for the customer, as well as trying to develop the business. And then they're getting some sales and stuff done as well. But, here in this bottom example, you're getting a lot more sales done and a little less admin time. But we're also making sure that the admin is flexible. So, you don't have to be at this or that meeting at X time. You can log on and do something in your spare time, or do it on your phone while you're waiting for a bus. So I guess, unsustainable is the top and sustainable is the bottom, because you definitely need your sleep, because that's going to help you to refresh and recharge so you can put more time and energy into sales. You can enjoy your personal time a little bit more, and you become more effective with your administration. Some examples of systemization, we look at some software that can take the human out of the process. That reduce labour costs. Now, I'm not saying you can go ahead and slash jobs, but you might be able to reassign them to more sales efforts, or maybe if you don't need those staff members, then if you are employing additional staff unnecessarily, you're not competitive in the marketplace. So you wouldn't be getting customers because your service price would have to be, or your product price would have to be higher, and you have to sell a higher volume of goods to actually make the same money. I think it's something like you need to sell 16% more in sales revenue to make up for a 10% discount on your actual price. So there's a lot of catching up to be done for every dollar that you spend. So it's far better to run efficiently and cheaper than it is to actually try to earn more or make more sales. In saying that though, sales it should be a core focus. and there's certain things that we can look at to improve sales as well. So removing the need for a physical presence. So obviously these days everybody's using Skype or Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever video conferencing. But there's other things that you can do to make sure that things are getting done without actually having to be there to supervise and make sure they're being done. I had a task list, checklist software that as soon as something was done, they just ticked it off. And I had notifications for some tasks that I felt were mission critical or had to be done by a certain time, and other tasks that were not critical. So my staff always knew to have that open all day. And when something needed to be done, they just go and tick it off. I get a notification. I know it's done. Even on my days off, I can be rest assured knowing that the place isn't going to burn down without me there, because they know, even subconsciously, even if you turn the notifications off, you can go, look, I get notifications when you're doing things, so if you're not doing them, I know. Then there's that little understanding that you're on the case. So having some things that make sure you don't need to be in the room at the same time, or even watching their screen at the same time, make sure they're doing the right thing, and I'll show you something about that later. And making sure they're using their time effectively without excessive supervision, and make sure you're getting the most out of your billable hour, or the customer's getting value if that's how you charge for your services. So daily checklists and operating standards, that's just about making sure that everything's done that needs to be done. Sometimes a staff member might go, all right, well, I can't be bothered cleaning the cupboard out. But if you don't do it every week or every second week, then in 3 months' time it becomes a big problem, because, or maybe by the time the next stock order comes around, it becomes a big problem because it's not like it delays the delivery driver. They get frustrated, and that you get a worse working relationship with them. They end up having to spend extra time on fixing that later. So it's better to keep on top of these things rather than sort of deal with it at the last minute. Other things might be creating clear process flows and standardizing your product. So that just means having a chart on if this happens, go to step 2. If that happens, go to step 3, and so on and so forth. And that makes sure that the product or service is delivered in exactly the same way every time, whether or not you're there to ensure that that's happening or not. So you can put little process flow checklist, integrate your process flow with that task management thing, and they can check off certain stages as they go, and you'll always know where they're up to. So there's a software called Process Street. Every time you have a customer and you need to book a follow-up call, you need to book an appointment, you need to book something else afterwards, like a meeting room, then you can have a process flow that even if all of those things are not done on the same day or even in the same hour, you can have them check it off. So at any time, any other staff member can walk in and pick up where they left off and know exactly what's happened. So, some things might be that you're removing redundant processes. I had a client once who had a process where, they did have a documented process, but somewhere at the end of the process, or even halfway in the middle, it said, sign in the purple book. Okay, where is the purple book? Why do we sign in it? Who signs in it? Who's authorized to sign in it? These sorts of things need to be clarified. There's a Japanese saying called yokopoke, and that means making it foolproof. Don't make the plan so loose that it could be wildly interpreted. I mean, sometimes there might be some things that go on that interrupt it, but that's why you hire intelligent staff, and maybe you give them some other steps. Maybe your process isn't completely replicable across every client, but there are certainly parts of each client, that's the same. For example, raising an invoice for a client is probably going to be the same every time. You may not always do it in the same order, but there will be certain things that you do, like getting their details, providing a quote, getting a signed acceptance of quote, sending the invoice out. And they're all fairly, consistent things that happen in a consistent order. So, and that can be carried across in numerous things throughout your business. Next, we'll look at creating usable data. So, by using online forms. So, online forms are a great thing where, if you've got a policy on something, that usually flows through to a procedure, which is what we're talking about, having step-by-step instructions. And then that usually flows through again to a form. And the form collects the right information. Usually it would go to, or it would have on it, for office use or something like that. And that would go to accounts for their part to make sure that part is done. And I'm a big advocate for online forms, because not only can you make sure that information is stored somewhere, it's also usually up to date and accessible. So if you add a new thing on the form, that's the same version everywhere. You don't then have to go and recall all of these paper documents or wait until they run out and print a whole new run to then go and put them everywhere. So online forms also give you data, and it's real time. So you can have someone fill out a form online. You can even finger sign and date, take a photo of something as an audit control, and as soon as they hit submit or send, you get a notification. Yep, it's there, or it just pops up in your inbox. So it's then able to be put in a workflow. Then we have a centralized knowledge base for staff and clients to self-solve problems. Now, you may not necessarily need one for your clients, but certainly, if you're a manager and you think about how many times someone's asked you, how do you fix the photocopier? And I guarantee you, if you record yourself fixing that same problem that happens all the time and making like a little video blog about it on a central database, you can then go to the database and watch the video, and they'll figure out exactly how to fix it. And that way, maybe they might escalate it if there's something a little bit more complicated or a different problem to what you thought they were trying to explain. And that's where you having a good description and explanation in notes. But by spending maybe 20 minutes on putting together a how-to on how to fix the copier, you might save that question being asked of you, or having to spend 20 minutes explaining or fixing yourself. Who knows, every week, twice a week, 3 times a week, once a month. That's still 12 times more. Like, even if it's only once a month, that's still 12 times more that you would have had to have done it. So spending 20 minutes on a video justifies 12 times 20 minutes in time saving over the course of a year. Online communication platforms. Okay, so yes, we've got emails, but going beyond that, people are using Slack, which is a chat. And that stops these silos from happening within staffing organizations, because you can just go and ask, hey, everybody, does anyone have a process or a plan or a solution for this? And someone from a random part of the business might be able to come in and say, yes, this is how you fix it. This is how you solve that problem. And sometimes that could come from the lowest level. That could come from someone you didn't expect. And you've all of a sudden, you've included everybody in the conversation from, how do I fix that? Because sometimes you have these online systems, communication systems, where they're searchable. So there's almost a knowledge base within it itself. So for example, in Slack, it saves the last 10,000 messages. So if you go, problem with the printer, anyone got any tips? You can put in the search bar printer, and you might even get someone else's conversation on the same issue. And that could have happened, a month, 2 months ago. So there's always a way to to communicate. And in saying that, from your communication platform or your Slack channel or something like that, you can draw knowledge. If you have someone on the case, you can draw that knowledge and put it into your more permanent knowledge base. So like a SharePoint or a Igloo software or something like that. And that basically means that other people can access it. You know, there might be two locations where someone can access some core information without having to leave their desk or without having to bug someone else. Now, I'm not saying that you should encourage people from not socializing, not getting up and walking around and saying hello face to face. But sometimes that may not be possible. So, for example, I've got a client with Igloo software as their knowledge base, and they're remotely distributed instructors. So, excuse me, you can't simply go and walk over and ask someone, how do I do this? So they've got to go and search for it. And there might be forms, it might be documents, there might be links to online forms that they can all fill out on a phone or something, so they don't have to have a pile of paperwork they drag around with them. So the next thing is what to look for in a software. Now, a lot of people, this is an argument constantly had between tech firms, IT, in-house IT administrators and that sort of thing, whether to go cloud-based or to have your own server. Now, I probably lean towards cloud-based because the technology in that space is going through the roof, and it's moving so fast. You couldn't possibly stay relevant in your own server room with your own server stack unless you got to the scale that you could have a server, 2, manage that server effectively, and 3, afford to pay someone full-time or part-time to update things, to install new equipment or replace things when it's old, to back it up constantly. So I would say in the early stages, if you're looking at getting to the point where you need a server, then the only option is cloud-based, because there's a low cost of ownership, so there's a low entry cost. And with things like Amazon Web Services, you've pretty much got a whole server stack in the cloud that you can use. You can buy computers by the desktop or the remote desktop, and you can add as much data as you want with virtually no limits. So to create your own work environment in the cloud is just as possible as having everyone on cloud-based systems. So there's 2 schools of thought there, whether you have something like a Dropbox where you can install it on your own computer, they can download stuff and work on their own computer, and you might lose things on the desktop. But having a desktop in the cloud means that you could probably have, they have to log into that to do the work. They do the work there, they save things there, and at the end of the day, if they quit, if they go rogue and whatever, you can cut their access and all your stuff is yours. It's still on your systems, and you can still recover it. Excuse me. So the other one is trying to avoid data lock-in or siloing. So that kind of goes against what I said in the cloud-based system. However, you can kind of get around that by evaluating the contracts and agreements. Like cloud-based systems, they want to keep you there. So it might be time-consuming or costly to get the data in or out or to migrate it somewhere else. So, be clever about it and make a decision and stick with it. Intuitive, minimal requirement for training. This just goes down to user experience. That means, like SharePoint is a bit of a behemoth at the moment, and it's really hard to work with. Now, in order to run it, like whilst it is a pretty good system on an enterprise level, you kind of need to be trained in it. You have to do courses. You have to have someone who knows how to set it up to do all that sort of thing. Now, I know that most people these days should have all of those skills, those IT skills, but quite often they don't, and certainly not advanced enough for that. We're in the phone age where most people have their computer experience and their computer literacy on a mobile device rather than on a desktop. So the actual desktop usage is waning. And the next is an API. Everyone's heard that. And does it have something to link with something else that you need or that you want to use? So there's two parts to having an API. Do you have, two parts to having an IT system. Do you have one that does everything, like an enterprise grade system, but it's clunky, it's not seamless, or do you use like a best in breed software? And that means having a software that does pretty much one thing really well. They've worked on getting the way people work, they have a niche, and that might work really well for you. The difference might be using Microsoft Project versus something like Asana. So Microsoft Project is really good if you are an engineer, and it is very much about, you almost have to have a degree in project management to use it effectively or to use it to its full potential. Whereas in Asana, it's much more user-friendly. You can pick it up in an hour, you watch a few videos online, and you don't really need too much to understand exactly how useful it is. So APIs can help to extend things that aren't as user-friendly as you think. Maybe if you know what you kind of need as a group of software, you might just hold on and go, all right, well, I'm going to pick my software based on what talks to each other. And the list is growing daily on things that integrate with each other. So you want something that's scalable, and can it grow or shrink with your business? Yes, sometimes businesses shrink. It's not the best, but if you can't shrink with your demand or lack thereof, then you're going to have costs that you can't keep up with. So you need to be very careful in when you spend money. Maybe sort of leave it to the last safe moment, and if you do, can you go back on that? So some subscription platforms, you might be trying to stay below a certain usage level, and one day it pops over. What's going to happen next? Are you going to download all that stuff and then go back to a lower plan, or are you going to stick with the higher plan? So sometimes there's an expense in that, so you might have to be careful. And no lock-in with data. So can you get the information out if it becomes problematic? You've got to think about these software companies continually change. So whilst they might say, yeah, we're free for under X amount of usage, over time they might go, all right, well, they might get bought out and the whole management changes, and then they go and change the plans and go, well, we've got enough users to validate charging for everything. People often, these businesses often offer free things just to get into the marketplace. But once they're established, they can charge what they want. So make sure that you have a look at the pipeline and what they're going to do versus what else you think is coming up. And is it cloud-based? Is it mobile optimized? Can you use it on the run anywhere you are? And can you access it from every device, not platform specific? So Apple, Android, etc. I mean, there are some good systems that are only available on one or the other. But at the end of the day, what are your staff going to use? How are you structured? And what's going to be the best thing for you moving forward? So earlier I mentioned a way to check on staff and make sure they're doing the right thing, even if they're on a PC, even if you're not watching their screen and they're doing something that they should be doing. Now that depends on you and how you want to manage your staff. But if you want to have a little bit more visibility, particularly if you've had some problems with some staff, you might need to change the culture. And one way to do that is to implement something like this, which is a screenshot monitoring software. So this is a virtual assistant of mine who is doing a bit of work on a website. And that work was fairly time intensive. It was just data entry, updating some products for someone. But you can see here, you've got this green bar. That shows the keyboard and mouse activity. So it's quite high all the way through. And also you can see the screenshots. They tend to be a bit different, and they're not all the same, and they're done periodically. So some will do between 7 and 10 minutes. You can increase it to 15 or 30, just depends on which software you use. But at the end of the day, you can allow them to work whenever they want, but make sure that work is effective. So if they clock off, then they're clocked off. They can do whatever they want. If they clock on, then you're monitoring what they're doing on time. So you can say, yes, we use screenshot monitoring software. You're paid for 7.5 hours a day, so we want 7.5 hours of paid time logged in, and that's your time clock. That's when you work. You might have a policy of, we allow a little bit here and there. That's not a problem, but you can start to see when it becomes excessive. You can start to see when they're using, when they're on Facebook, 40% of the time. You can start to see when they've got a screen open and it's been idle and not changing for 2 hours because they've been on Facebook on their phone or something like that. So there's ways to control the work output that people are giving you, but at the same time you need to be open. You need to maybe have performance discussions if someone's not doing the right thing. Look at how you can help them and improve staff in other ways as well. And finally, I just want to touch on outsourcing. I know it's not everyone's for it. Now, outsourcing doesn't mean send it overseas necessarily, but if you are going to grow, you may not have the money to hire a staff member straight away. And sometimes, unless that staff member brings in revenue, then the only thing you're going to be able to do is have them as an expense, which might be okay if you're the primary revenue earner. But once you hire someone, then you're going to have the time cost of having to run that staff or manage that staff member, payroll, performance management, meetings to make sure that they know what you want them to do. So if you have a look at outsourcing in the early days before you hire a full-time staff member, then that might be a way to leverage your time to be able to make a bit more, to grow your business a little bit before you actually need to hire someone. So essentially you get what you pay for. And the less you pay, the less you get of the trust, the quality of work. Cultural context if you go overseas. So in these images here, I've got two. So not every outsourcer works in India. One of my clients, they use a lady who works on a macadamia farm in North Queensland. So, she is a mum. She works from home. She's in a remote area, and she enjoys working from her laptop and basically outsourcing or doing contract work for a few clients because she's good at admin, and she likes the flexibility of being able to work from home without having to drive 2 or 3 hours to a place of work. And for her, that's motivation. That's what she really enjoys. So sometimes outsourcing is not quite what you expect. Now, I say cultural context because sometimes if you want to write a a blog article that relates to Australians, then you probably need an Australian to write it, or someone who's lived in Australia for a reasonable period of time. I once hired a copywriter to write something about a business, and they were talking about interns and using the word fall as in autumn. And for starters, that was the wrong time of year. Second of all, we say autumn, we don't say fall. And lastly, whilst there are interns, it's not a thing in Australia. So, interning is a big sort of thing in America, or, perhaps in other countries like Malaysia, where this lady was from. But there's a huge amount of cultural context that needs to occur. Sometimes people use phrases that are out of place and it just doesn't seem right. So, and that might be okay if they're just going to do some simple data entry, cut, paste, that sort of thing, or typing in something that's data related. So horses for courses, I guess, was what I'm trying to say. Next is the language barrier. If there is one, do they have a phone if you need to talk to them? How important is the information? Like, is near enough good enough, or is accuracy important? All right. Time zone. So sometimes depending on where you hire in Australia, your best bets are probably Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, maybe they're a little bit further away. India, they're a bit off kilter in terms of time. So I guess you've got to think about how late you want to stay up, and these days with all of the communication platforms and your emails, you've got things like asynchronous communication, which means that I write something in there now and the other person can read it 4 or 6 hours later and write something back, and then I go and look at it whenever I'm ready. That was part of that admin component that can move around. But if you need someone to work for you all the time and when you need them, then you might need to think about Manila or something like that. So, or even just an Australian contractor. And do you need to increase your capacity outside of normal hours? So do you need someone on the opposite schedule to you to answer calls or to send responses in an email or in a chat? It really depends on your business. And remote access work after hours to save on hardware and administration. So if you've got outsourced IT, then they can log in when your business is closed and do updates or fix something, or that's if you're going to have your IT on premises as opposed to in the cloud. But in saying that, if you have a remote desktop in the cloud, you can still have them operate at any time and still have updates that are done and have your staff come in the next day, or you or your staff come in the next day, and everything's up and running and fine. So it can work. All right, well, thank you for listening. That's all I have. And if you've got any more questions, please feel free to contact me. In the next part, you'll have another opportunity to contact me. Otherwise, if you're on the website, please go through and use the chat or the conversation, the contact button. All right, well, thank you very much and have a great day.